But hi, welcome to our podcast, and thank you so much for being a part of this series that we're doing. First off, your name, so as in who's fronting at the moment, and pronouns as well, preferably.
Okay, so it's currently Sky and Sophia. We're co-fronting because Sky organized it, so she definitely has a right to be here. And Jade is pretty close. She's our primary protector, so she's ready to come if something happens. Yeah.
Is they them at the moment?
Yeah.
Good, I suppose. Yeah. Cool. Well, it's Moxie. I think I'm the only one in our system that has actually done any of except for Everett, but that has contributed to any of the podcasts, even though everyone in our system likes doing them. But it's Moxie. I use they them pronouns. I don't really know what my classifier is in the system, but I exist. I do things and stuff. And what is your ethnicity? So the body's ethnicity.
So we're Nigerian German. Yeah. So half and half exactly.
Nice. And country of residence?
Germany.
And how would you describe, I guess, the body's appearance? So if you were to categorize it from, like, say, white passing, medium, deep, or ebony skin tone, how would you describe that?
I would say medium. We're not white passing. I don't think anyone would assume that, but we're not. Our skin isn't that dark either. So.
You grew up in Germany?
No, we grew up in England. We moved to Germany 4 years ago.
Okay, cool. And how did you find, I suppose, growing up in England? Because I mean, we personally have only been over there, like on a trip to visit like family and friends, like last year or so. But how did you find that experience as a person of color?
Well, so I was there when I was quite young, so primary school. The majority of my school actually there were very few white people. The majority of people were from like Pakistan and places like that. So there was one other girl in my class. She's black, and I was the only mixed person. Although, well, there was another girl, but she never said specifically. So yeah. So I didn't think it was actually that strange then. So it was never a topic because you had people of so many different races until like it was different when we came to Germany. We were 11 and we were the only not white person in our entire grade. So when we came, it was already a topic. It was, what are you? Do you count as German? And we're like, that's a fun question.
Do you count as German?
Yeah, the first question we were asked was, what are you? Where are you from? We're like, okay, so first, I'm also a human being. It's not a what, it's a who. And I was like, but people were very interested in us.
Do you get a lot of questions and comments on your hair as well? Like, and people just trying to touch your hair unnecessarily?
Well, one time I was walking down the street and someone just grabbed a handful of my hair and pulled it, and they said they were checking if it was a wig. So it happens a lot. So we have dreadlocks now for a couple of months. That's also a topic. People on the road are like, can you even wash your hair? I'm like, yes, of course I can wash it. It's clean. My hair doesn't, it just means I don't comb it out. But yeah, there's always they're very excited about your hair. If you have like extensions or braids, they'll say, oh, are those dreadlocks, specifically in Germany? Yeah, there are a lot of questions. Just strangers on the street will just walk up to you and just touch your hair and be like, oh, is that real?
I remember like when we were in high school, I was in class and I think 2 or 3 of the girls that were like in the like popular group or whatever that were in my class decided that while we were watching this movie or whatever, that they would just start sticking like pens and pencils from their pencil case in my hair. Like this is when our hair was like long, like it was like full on like fro-like, right? And they would just stick pencils in my hair. And I was just like, sis, why though?
Yeah, people used to do that to us, especially in art class, but it would be food. They would try and balance food in it. Or in a cinema, there'd be complete strangers sitting behind you who try and get popcorn to stay in your hair. And it's not very nice. You're always like, how am I meant to respond to this person who thinks my hair is their trash can? What kind of response are you meant to give them?
Have you found over time, like responding to a lot of the things, whether it be hair comments or people like touching your hair or treating it as a trash can, like have you found that your response has change, I guess, over time, or it's still one of those issues where like that anxiety to even like discuss or even say something to them is still like very prevalent, and you just like kind of like let it happen type of thing?
I think it depends on which author it is. So if Jade is fronting or if Jade is close, she will tell them off. She will give them a whole lecture on racial sensitivity, or just what kind of behavior is that? What would you do? That's why I've seen her go up to grown people on the streets who are pointing at us and be like, what is your point? What questions you have? Ask your questions now so the next person doesn't have to experience this nonsense. But
Yeah.
usually if it's like Sky or anyone with a little, you just don't say anything. You just keep walking and pretend it never happened. So yeah,
Mm,
most of us are a bit nervous to be confrontational because you don't know where it's going to go after that. You don't know how the person's going to react.
yeah. And how do you find it as someone that is mixed race, like interacting with the different cultures that you're a part of? Like, do you have a sense of belonging, I suppose, in either of those, or do you feel very ostracized from both?
I feel that I belong to both of them. I wouldn't say I don't. I am technically part of this group, but I don't think that I actually belong in it. But they're not. The group isn't always as accepting, and I actually do think it's. So people often think that it's worse with white people, so with the German cheap people. But actually, I think it's equally as bad with Nigerian people. So people saying, "Oh, you're too white." Even our parents say it. And then there's the German people. They tend not to be as direct, but you still see like them talking about things like, but are you really German? Questions like that. So I personally see myself as belonging to both the groups, but neither of the groups truly 100% accept you as a real member.
Was that something that you discovered when you were younger, or I suppose something that you're only just coming to terms with at the moment?
I think it was definitely something that I've known all my life. It was not really like a discovery moment. I've always really felt, because my parents would always say, oh, we're more, them, that also makes them more Nigerian than German because they grew up in Nigeria, and they'll always be like, yeah, you're Nigerian, but not really, because you don't really know what it's like. You haven't really experienced it. So I think hearing that from however young you are, you never really have that feeling of, oh, it's a sudden realization that I'm not really, they don't really accept me, because the feeling of acceptance was never really there to begin with.
When you're saying that as well, and do you find that with anyone else that you have interacted with from either your family or friends background, or online or anything like that from Nigeria, right, that it has been treated, and I suppose the same question goes for Germany as well, right, but that it has been treated that if you haven't spent, you know, X amount of time in that country, that you belong less to the culture in itself?
Yeah, I definitely think it happens with both groups. So it happens with Nigeria that I've never lived there. I've only been there a few times, and it was only when I was much younger. So then people say, oh, but you're not really Nigerian. But I'm like, I know everything, that I know the culture. I know, I've taken time, I've learned it, I've grown up with it. Yeah, so I don't see why you have to be in the country to belong to it. But then
Yeah.
also the same thing happens in Germany, though, like German isn't your mother tongue. You didn't start with this language. You didn't grow up here. You weren't born here. So you're German, but not quite.
Yeah. And have people, because that in itself is a form of bullying, have you also experienced other forms of bullying from people from either group because of you being mixed race and not fitting 100% into either category?
I think it's mostly with people from Germany, because most of the people that I know from Nigeria are related to me in some form, so they wouldn't really be as direct. It won't be as obvious, and you also didn't spend as much time with it. But I would say we've had teachers make some very strange comments, like they see your passport and we have a German passport, and they go, "Oh, did you steal it?" And yeah, I had a teacher in the 6th grade ask me who I stole my passport from, a passport that had a photo of me, yeah, and everything.
Yeah,
Who did you steal it from? So you hear it from students, you hear it from everyone.
that's
It's not
so
really.
ignorant.
Sometimes I'm like, did you mean to say something to hurt us, or are you just lacking that? Like, just why would that be the thought that first comes to you, that it was stolen?
Mm.
And why would you say that to an 11-year-old child?
Oof. do you experience as well, like when you go out to, like, you know, when you go out to the shops or anything like that, because of your skin color, like that, those like microaggressions or anything like that from, you know, shopkeepers or anything that will be keeping like a closer eye on you or anything like that because they assume that you're going to steal something or along those lines?
I've actually never had that happen to me in Germany. I think
Mm,
if it's something that I just have been completely oblivious to, but I've never noticed it. But we were in the US on holiday, and it did happen, and someone was like, if they did think we had stuff shoved into our very small bag, that we were stealing things. And it has happened occasionally in the UK, but only in major cities like in London. So I think it's actually
mm.
getting a lot better, but I haven't really experienced that much of it.
Yeah, yeah. And I suppose when it comes to internally and in the inner world within the system, right? Do you have alters? Like, are there alters in the system that are, you know, a darker tone than what the body is, or even like a lighter tone than what the body is? And I suppose, what's your opinion on that? Like, as in how that would have happened internally?
So we have Sage. She's sort of our wisest alter. Like she's not the most. Yeah, she's our darkest skinned alter as well. She's very wise. She knows she's the one you go to if you need advice, but not for anything emotional. I think that might have a connection to our parents as well, because and to like we have a great aunt and she looks very similar to her. I would never go to her for emotional advice, but if you need cold hard facts and you need the way that things are going to go, she's the person you ask. So we actually think it has some relation to that, because
Mm,
she's one of the few people that she's mixed, but she's darker skin, and most of the people that we know that are mixed have quite light skin as well. So we think that might have
yeah.
had an effect. We also have quite a few alters that are white. So for example, we have Winnie, she's Welsh, and she has a lot of emotional trauma, and some of that is also racial trauma. And we think the reason for that is she can handle it better because it doesn't connect with her as much, being
Mm.
bullied for having darker skin or for being mixed. It's not something that she can really truly understand, so it's easier for her to cope with it.
Yeah, yeah. And do you think that that's because I definitely like from our end, right? We have a lot of those, and I think a lot of that is due to, you know, growing up in a very, like for us, in a white area, for example, and having to have someone in the system that can be very disconnected from those racial issues in order to survive. Do you feel like that is very, at least from interactions that you've had with the community, for example, that is something that a lot of people would resonate with, is that having alters that are lighter skin than the body because you are either mixed race or a darker skin tone, right, is because, you know, you need to have that disconnect in order to get through racial traumas growing up or later on in life.
Yeah, I think that's something that I've actually heard other people talk about. It's that's their theory for why they have it, because it tends to be that the authors that don't look the same as the body, they do tend to be the ones to have any racial trauma or like emotional trauma in that sense. But we
Mm,
actually have something that all our sort of protector, all our strong authors that are meant to like look after us or things like that, they all tend to be darker skin than the body, which we think is actually a connection to the fact that a lot of because they can sort of be disconnected from the people who we are usually around. So it's sort of that differentiating between the people who would possibly hurt us because they're the ones we're around, which usually tends to be white people, and then our protectors
mm,
being different from them. So there's like an obvious contrast.
mm.
I'm not sure if that made
Yeah.
sense.
No, no, it did make sense. I was just reflecting on it. It does make a lot of sense and has me just like internally thinking as well. I'm like, that might explain a couple in our system that are also darker skin tone and that are our main protectors. So I'm like, that's an interesting food for thought. Do you like what do you guys think of, I guess, the community like discourse, whatever everyone calls it nowadays? What do you think of that? And I suppose recently it's come up, but it's always kind of been around, but of the whole like race claiming issue and everything like that, where white systems have alters that are darker skin tones than the body, but are claiming the different racial identities that don't match the body.
I think there's a problem when they front and they'll say I'm black to someone and the body is white or something like that, because then you're claiming the identity in a way that you're saying this is the kind of way that I live my life, when it's sort of not. It's the way you are in the inner world. So we are alters that aren't mixed, which say in the inner world I present as, or I look like this, because they don't want to claim an identity that they haven't really experienced in the world that everyone else is living in. So we have authors who, so for example, we have Layla. She would say she in the inner world is Japanese, but she would never claim that identity and say, oh, this is who I am in the outer world, because that's not how she's lived her life. That's not how other people will see her. That is not how she can't claim that identity, because the body doesn't have that, and it's not fair to all the people who actually live their life like that.
Yeah.
Like,
do you find that there's a lot of misunderstanding, I guess, within the community, or lack of empathy for minority groups to like basically understand that point that you are putting forward there, is that there are alters that may present and identify, I guess, and resonate differently with cultures internally, but when they say it, when they're fronting in, a white body, of understanding that there needs to be some sort of, not necessarily middle ground, but just there needs to be more listening to people of color when it comes to these issues.
Actually, I've seen all the things I've experienced tend to be more positive, that people are like, oh, this is not, that they're not trying to claim it. They're not trying to say that they are that way. I think that's only happened to me. I've only experienced that once, where people were like, oh, but I have black autism, so I understand what it's like. Like, no, you don't, because when they're fronting, they're still going to be treated like a white person, because the body is white. They will still have those privileges that they still won't have to. They still won't have the way you don't have the reaction of like dissociating with it. People in the outer world aren't going to react to them in the same way that they would to someone who is fronting in a black body, because that's not how they're going to see them. That's not how they visually represent. So they're not going to be treated that way. So you can't say that you understand. And I don't think I've actually experienced. I've had singlets who are on like Discord servers for people with DID saying, oh, but you have black autism, you know what it's like, and they tend to also be white people. So I don't think it actually tends to come from systems themselves. It's because most of them trying to be more sensitive, because people who have had like not the greatest past, who have trauma, they don't want to hurt more people. Usually those are the kinds of people who be like, oh, I know what suffering is like, and I don't want anyone else to feel that way. So I think it's more people who are just oblivious to what like true like emotional pain and physical pain and things like that are the more people who are more likely to act that way.
Do you find that within specifically the dissociative community, right, that do you find that there is more or less acceptance of yourselves being mixed race than there is, in the groups that you're a part of, whether it be school, friends, family, whatever, being mixed race? Like, do you find that it's better or worse, I suppose, of that acceptance within the community itself, like for you? I don't know whether that question made sense.
I 100% have to say it's more of a feeling of acceptance, whereas like with groups of my friends, either you don't have like the bullying, but you don't have the true acceptance. It's just like, we're just not going to comment. We're going to pretend like we're going to just make sure we never say anything mentioning race around you, or we'll say it very quietly in the hopes that you don't hear. Or if the topic of racism comes up, we're going to very, very quickly change it, because we don't know how to react around you. Whereas I feel like if I'm with people from the dissociative community, they're more willing to talk about topics like such as that, as long as it's not a trigger, because it's just generally a community of people who have trauma, and they understand pain, and they want to help. And it's more, I feel like the community as a whole tends to be more accepting when people yeah, they know what it's like to not be accepted, even if it's for a different reason, such as having DID or OSDD. If you've experienced what it's like to not be accepted, you're more likely to be accepting.
And even further inside from that, do you find that the like Black DID community is equally more or less accepting of you being mixed race, rather than, you know, darker skin? Like, do you find, or have you had any experiences where people have kind of discounted your opinion on racial discussions because of your skin being lighter than theirs?
Yeah, I have. People will say, you're paler, so it's people aren't quite as bad when it comes to you, or you're mixed, so you can't understand what racism is because you're not Black, things like that. But I actually don't, yeah, the Black associative community, I don't think I have any access to that, because that tends to be more of the places that, like, you saying you have racial trauma is not as valid because you're not truly Black, and only Black people can have it. I've sort of heard things like that, but usually I just like, okay, I'm gonna stay away because I don't want to upset other people. Yeah, it's easier to just be part of a more diverse group where it's just everyone can join it than to try and get into to try and say, oh, okay, I'm mixed and I want to be in this place where people can talk about what it's like to you know, live in to have racial trauma and things like that.
Yeah, which is, that's like awful. Like, but I can understand that as well from, you know, our own perspective of being mixed, and some of the interactions that we have had in the past in the community is that because there has been like a lot of issues lately, around like race claiming, and from that a lot of Black systems have been very, and rightfully so, like aggravated, agitated, you know, upset about white systems like having alters and race claiming. But because of that, there has been that extra exclusion where they've just kind of like put up their walls, and anyone that is, you know, lighter than a certain skin tone but is still Black, or, you know, mixed race, right, that it's kind of like, well, you don't know racial trauma, so you don't have any say on this. When, like, because you are mixed race, it's like, yes, well, I do have like mixed race and not white passing, right? It's like, well, yes, I still do have racial trauma. Like, it has, yeah, it's very interesting to kind of see that change, I guess, in dynamic over time because of how everything is kind of like domino effect, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I understand
yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I just had a thought and it completely disappeared. Oh yeah, right, because I was looking at my questions as well, and not specific, I guess, just to the dissociative community, but in, well, it can be as well, but in general.
I'm watching a movie.
Who am I speaking to?
Penny, I thought we were watching School of Rock earlier. I thought it was still the movie.
No, hey, did you say your name's Honey?
Hi.
Hi. Hi, my name
Okay,
is
I don't know who
Moxie.
you are, so I'm gonna get someone else for a
That's
second.
okay. That's okay. I can call you
I
guys back
missed the
later if you want.
movie. Ooh, my phone has low battery. Sorry.
That's
That was
okay.
unexpected.
That's okay. I was just like, I was like, oh, wait, what's happening? There's sounds that are happening that I don't recognize the voice. I'm like, oh, hello. I like switch my screen back to Zoom. I'm like, oh, hi.
We have more littles. They're getting a bit hard to keep track of. They're very excitable.
I was like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm so sorry. I'm not School of Rock.
It's
This
a
is a
good
good
film.
movie. Yeah. I'm like, oh, what a throwback. Now that makes me like, now I want to watch that when I'm done. I'm like, oh yeah, School of Rock sounds great. Relaxing Sunday in bed watching movies. If you guys are too spacey though, I was gonna say we can wrap up.
Oh no, we're fine. It was just very unexpected because the number of littles went up and she's very excitable and she wanted to watch the film.
Oh,
Yeah,
she's
we'll
so
watch it
cute.
again later.
It's like really funny though, because when she came out, like I could literally the second that like we could sense that it was a little, it's like Kirsten, who's one of like our caretaker alters, she like I could just feel her coming towards the front. I was like, don't worry, I got this. I'm great with kids. She's like,
That's so
I'm
sweet.
just gonna
Okay, did I miss a question?
Um, no, you missed me slightly dissociating when I was thinking of a question because I scrolled back to my what do you call it, my OneNote notebook thing, and so I couldn't see your screen at all. And then I heard like the vocal change, and I was just like, wait a second, and I go back here, and I'm like, oh, hello. So no, you didn't miss a question. I was looking at, oh yeah, because one of the two of the things I wanted to ask you guys as well is, and not just within like the dissociative community, but just in general, do you find when interacting with different, well, between like the different two cultures, right, that there are certain mannerisms that you have to pick up, or certain, yeah, like certain mannerisms that you had to pick up to fit more into that group that you're interacting with?
Yeah, definitely. If I'm spending time with young people, I complain a lot more. I always find there's always something to you always find a topic. It's usually school. Um, I make my voice a lot whinier, which is it sounds sort of rude, but German people they sort of have like a twinge to their voice. So at that, I'm also quieter. I'm more likely to let someone speak in front of me. Whereas if I'm spending time with Nigerian people or other mixed people, I'm very loud and very excitable. I will make all my jokes and I will make everyone make sure they're heard. And yeah, so I would say I definitely do have sort of, there was a time we thought it was two separate authors, but it was just me just changing myself slightly.
Yeah.
Yeah, we thought
Does
it
that
was
like add
time.
like yeah, does that add, I suppose, another layer of complexity within that? Because you said, you know, you thought it was two separate alters, because with the body being mixed race, when you're interacting with people and having to kind of adopt certain mannerisms that are more, you know, socially acceptable within the different racial and like cultural groups, that it can get, like you said, a little bit confusing, because it's like, okay, this is happening, and you know, but you also have a dissociative disorder, and you're like, is this different alters, or is this just me acting different in different cultural situations?
Yeah, it's very frustrating for our gatekeeper because he's always like, wait, did we just, was there just a switch that I wasn't aware of? Or is it still the same person and they just managed to completely change that fast? Yeah, it gets very confusing. You do often go for a hunt for the new alter because you're like, when did I start acting like this? And then it turns out, oh, it was just a different social group, and that's just how it meant. I
Yeah,
just mirrored their behavior a bit. Yeah.
yeah. Have you found like from that that it has been, I guess, confusing? And did you have any moments of invalidation specifically to do with having to, you know, having to change in the cultural, like, you know, context that you're in, right? Like, did you feel any sense of invalidation towards your own disorder because of that, of being like, oh well, I'm faking or whatever, because it's just a change from, you know, my from interacting with black people and mixed race people to interacting with like German people, that it's more of just like a social setting type of thing?
Yeah, I've definitely thought that. There was a time I thought, oh, wait, so maybe all these people that I'm talking to in my head and having these strange and spontaneous conversations with, maybe it's just me thinking about how I would act in different social situations. So there were, so that's, I think that's why it took me so long to actually believe that like Jade was another person because and not just me when I'm like more, like when I'm louder and when I'm with around Nigerian people. Yeah, so it definitely makes it a bit harder to trust yourself, because when you can change yourself to fit another group, you do have to ask yourself, am I just changing myself to fit into a different context now, or is it truly a different author? Is it truly a different person, or is it just me acting differently? So yeah, it can be a bit scary. You're a bit not quite sure. So also, if you don't
Yeah.
have a professional diagnosis like we don't, it can, yeah, it's a bit more worrying.
Yeah.
But I don't think anyone else
And
struggles with it.
yeah. And I know that this isn't specifically a question on race, but I something that I wanted to ask as well. How have you found interacting in the dissociative community, and whether you like you know, said it to anyone or anything like that before, the fact of not having a professional diagnosis, like, has that been, you know, a positive or negative experience, or a very, like, you know, mixed, I suppose, experience? Pardon the pun, irony. But has that been like, how's that experience been for you, saying, hey, I don't have a diagnosis, but I believe this to be the disorder that I have? Like, do you find people have discounted your views on things, or not wanted to talk to you further, or do you find that they've been more accepting or understanding, or has it been a very like mixed response?
I've never said it because I think it's just, yeah, it's not really necessary, and it just worries that people are going to say things like, oh, so you're just faking it, and then you lose all the context of people who feel the same way, and then so it's just adding an extra sort of level of drama, which sounds wrong because it's not really adding drama, but it's just being able to tell people the truth. But it's sort of worrying that that's how people would see it, that you're just like attention seeking or things like that. So
Mm,
prefer, or that they'll start looking for signs that you're faking it,
mm,
because it's not official. Yeah, or they'll be like, or
yeah.
they'll, yeah. So it's just a worry that things will go wrong if you say it. So just keep it to yourself.
Yeah. And with those worries as well, do you find that they're worries that are, you know, anxiety and trauma based worries, or is it because there are things that you have observed from other people that have said, like other systems that have said, I don't have a diagnosis, and then people that do have a diagnosis attacking them online and things like that? Like, do you think that it's from observing that there are more anxieties about, you know, saying it or not saying it?
Yeah, I think it's definitely from seeing it happen to other people, not just with DID or OSDD, but people saying, I think I, even saying something like, I think I might have depression, which isn't even, you're not even saying you do, but then people are like, well, if you don't have a professional diagnosis, then no. It's the fact that there is gatekeeping around mental illnesses. Like, people can't even worry or like think that they might have something, because there are often people who don't have the resources to go and actually get a professional diagnosis, and the fact that you won't let them at least try to figure things out on their own, or at least like look at some tips and tricks and things like that to coping, because you want
Mm,
to, because they can't get a professional diagnosis. It's actually really sad that there are people with gatekeep. It's often the people who are looking for those resources are the people who can't get a professional diagnosis, either because they can't afford like to go and see a therapist, or because they still live in a situation where they can't, and things like that. They're usually the ones who are actually seeking it, and they're the ones that are being prevented from having access to it. So I think, yeah, people shouldn't be able to say, oh, I have bipolar disorder, and like say, oh, and so you have to treat me this way, and it's official because I think it, and they have no things to base it on. But I don't think saying things like, oh, I might have bipolar disorder, I might have depression, I think I might have DID, those people shouldn't be immediately shunned and sort of forced out of the community, because just because they can't get a professional diagnosis yet.
yeah. And do you think that there is, like, in terms of topics that the community, like the dissociative community and the mental health community, need to really work on at the moment, like, what would you say that those would be? Like, would you say overall it would be like just, you know, being more empathetic and like listening, or like more to specific topics, whether it be, you know, racism or ableism, like sexism, things like that? Like, is there something specific that you think really needs to be focused on in the mental health and dissociative community at the moment?
I would say accepting that not everyone has the resources to sort of get the kind of help that they need, and that people shouldn't be judged, or they shouldn't be sort of blamed for not being able to get help when, because there are instances where people are like, well, why don't you see a therapist? And people are like, but I can't. And they're like, but that's your problem. It's not, because you have to be more accepting that there are people who their lives are different. The access, maybe they don't have the money. Maybe they're in a poor living situation. They shouldn't be blamed for not being able to get help. There's a difference between not wanting to and not being able to. That needs to be recognized more.
The question from there as well would be how like, what would you like to see from the community going forward, like in terms of actions to get to those points? Are there specific like actions from that, or is it more so again just having, like, being able to listen, I suppose?
It's currently Jade. Sorry, I also wanted to add a point that
Oh, yeah, of course.
there's a lot of people. Sorry, we can switch very subtly. People are often they're less accepted by the community because of their age. We're 15, and we understand things too. We understand what mental health can be like, and people cannot, and what mental illness is, and people cannot say, oh, you're too young to understand this topic. People have said you can't have dissociative identity disorder because you're not old enough. Which makes no sense. It is a childhood trauma. It is something we've had as a kid. They say that the fact that you know that you have it means you don't, because you're not old enough yet. So that means you must be faking. And especially this belief that teenagers are more like are often just attention seeking, and they don't really feel what they're feeling.
Like with the ageism, do you see, because from my perspective of what I've observed of being like, you know, part of the online community for the past, I think maybe 3 years that we've been online for, is that it's like there's this one age group, I suppose, that's deemed as acceptable and at the forefront of things, is, you know, people that are in, I would say like from 20 to 30, that's the acceptable group, and the pioneers, so to speak, paving way. And like, you know, I know I'm totally like throwing us under the bus for this, because it literally is very, from what I've observed and the friendship groups and the groups that like we've been a part of, is that it's accepted by the majority of the community that, you know, people between 20 and 30 know that they have the disorder, right? But then there's this ageism of people that are, you know, in the category that you guys are in, which is like in like between like the ages of like, say, like 15 and like 20, right? And then like anything above like, you know, say 30 or 35, right? Where there isn't that much acceptance, or I suppose mainly your group where there isn't that acceptance, and then the older group where
There's often the
there
you
isn't
should have integrated
representation.
by now, or you should have grown out of this.
Yeah,
When it's
yeah,
someone older,
exactly.
I've seen a 70-year-old join a Discord server about dissociative identity disorder because their daughter showed it to them, and people said, by this age you would have integrated, and they were removed from the server.
That's awful.
Yeah.
I'm not shocked, but that's still awful.
Yeah,
And
that
yeah,
was
that
an
is
immediate, no, we cannot be part of this group. We need to exit, find a way
yeah,
out, make a final statement, goodbye.
yeah. And so for you guys, it's like the opposite of just being like, you're too young to understand, even though the people that are saying that, it's kind of like, well, the disorder develops, like you said, you know, it develops in childhood before, you know, the age of like 9. So it's kind of like, if you're older than 9, then it means that you can have the disorder. And also the fact that they think that you can't understand the disorder when there's so much more resources and representation nowadays overall of the community, right, than there was a couple of years ago. So for them to pretend like, you know, you've been living under a rock type of thing and can't see all of these other people talking about their experiences is very mind-boggling.
I think, in fact, with dissociative identity disorder, we're the group that are most likely to understand things, because as soon as you have things, as soon as you have trauma, you tend to mature faster. So if it's all, we're the group of people that would be able to understand things, more complicated things, especially about emotions and mental health, from a younger age, so even from the age. So I've known since I was created about since I was actually, well, I figured out like the terms when I was 10, or when the body was 10.
Yeah, yeah. And do you find that as well, like with being part of a younger age group, that also resonates across a lot of other factors in life, whether it be like things like gender, sexuality, racism, things like that, that your generation is really like more able to like kind of absorb things more, because there is so much like vocalization on those issues nowadays, that there are, like you said, like those terms that you can understand, compared to, you know, say, like, even though we're not a huge age gap apart, we're like 10 years apart though, still, like compared to like back when we were like 15, like there wasn't anything on anything, right? Like, do you find that for your generation it's like you said, like there is that ability to comprehend things from a younger age because of where you're set, like in like timeline wise, like a birth, right?
I would say our age group has it's the easiest for us to be accepting, because we have the internet. You can Google dissociative identity disorder and see people's personal stories, and it's so much easier to accept an individual and accept the way that they're living. And when it's something personal, and you can hear from this person and you can see how they live their life, it is easier to see it as something that is real and something that people actually experience, than when you're just reading a list of terms and psychological explanations. You can watch videos of people talking about it. You can hear people talking. You can hear people say their emotions. You can hear them. You can even see them switch and hear difference in accents and personality. And it makes it so much easier to believe it's real.
Yeah, yeah. And what is your hope from that, like when it comes to that ageism, right, in the community? What is your hopes from that moving forward, in terms of, you know, acceptance?
That people don't believe that, first of all, integration is not always the goal. That so people shouldn't, and that you shouldn't believe that someone's going to grow out of something, especially not an identity disorder. That when you know about it from a younger age, that people just take teenagers more seriously, and that it's not always this, oh, it's just hormones, something like that. That regardless, it shouldn't even be a question of age, because all these people have had it from when they were 5. I thought when that older person and joined the group, I would have thought, wow, well, here's someone who has had this for so long and they're alive and they're functioning and they can actually help more people. And instead it was this complete, no, you're too old. There should be no limit to what age you can be. It should just be, you say you have this, we believe you and we will help you. There should not, I don't think people should even have to specify their age at this point, other than for specific topics. Because honestly, it should not be a reason to believe or not believe someone just because they're older or younger.
Yeah, yeah. And are there any, I guess, further, you know, points, I guess, as a wrap up for this as well, like any further points that you guys really want to discuss and I guess put out there to those who are watching and listening to this, you know, podcast video, about any of the topics in relation to, you know, racism, ageism, anything like within the community that you feel is really important to be able to put out there?
This is something about the brain. Dissociative identity disorder is about how the brain functions. the body that it's inside, the race that they belong to, none of that is a reason to have or to not have the disorder, because it is something. It's not. I've heard ridiculous things like black people can't be depressed because their brains are different. Just, it's a human being. The brain is the same. It will function the same way regardless of what kind of body it's in, regardless of what that body looks like. That does not have an effect on it. The brain is still it will still react to this is still a way that any brain can react to trauma regardless of what kind of body it is. And don't like believe someone more because of their race or believe them less. Just have faith in people. Believe that when they tell you something, believe them until they prove that you shouldn't. Be caring, and don't try and block people from, say, if you don't have a professional, it's not real. Just in general, just be more caring. Just believe things. Innocent until proven guilty. Believe someone's telling the truth rather than believe they're lying.
I really, really appreciated like being able to interview you guys on this, and I'm really looking forward to others being able to listen and watch the audio on this experience, or these experiences that you guys have, and your opinions on the topics, because I feel it's really important to have different have different variants of visibility and everything like that within the community, and for everyone to be able to share their stories, because at the end of the day, like, to be able to make progress within and out of the community, there needs to be like that diversity of experience, and really appreciate you guys taking the time.
It was so nice to be able to talk about it. It's not usually a topic that we ever get to. I don't think we've said any of these things out loud before. It's quite nice, very validating as a system.